Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network. Me and Dallas King make our way through the A24 filmography, TV series, and bring you interviews with the talent involved along the way. And in this episode, we have a rare beast for us just now, a new A24 film to discuss, Minari. So Dallas, are you excited to discuss this much anticipated film?
Absolutely, yeah. A new A24 nugget is always welcome, and it'll tide us over until I think now we're looking at June or July before the next meal. We're starving here. We're starving.
Exactly, yeah. It's one of those things like it's a bit of a limbo period, obviously, for the podcast, but every few weeks it feels like, oh, we've got this film to look forward to down the line. Oh, that'll be one that me and Dallas can talk about in 2022. But one of those films, and I'm going to be curious to hear if you actually caught this one, A24 has acquired US rights to Pleasure, an explicit drama about the adult film industry following its premiere at the virtual Sundance Film Festival. So this is an interesting bit for me. A24 will release the full uncensored film as well as an R-rated version later in the year. So in the UK, we're going to have this film released by Mubi. There's no word on whether it's going to be an uncensored version or an R-rated one. But Dallas, did you catch this one perchance at Sundance? And if not, are you kicking yourself right now?
I am kicking myself. Yes. It was one which I'd sort of didn't know about heading into the festival, and then it started to get a bit of buzz, so I put it on my list. But unfortunately, by the time I got around to potentially viewing it, it had already virtually sold out in terms of press allocation bookings, so I was unable to catch it. And I thought, okay, well, no, no harm done. It'll get released eventually, and of course, A24 again. I'm like, damn it! It would have given me the one up. I would have been able to gloat about seeing it for a couple of months before you were eventually able to do it. But it did have a great buzz. I can understand why in America it will probably need the 2 ratings. It is essentially an exploration of a woman fresh off the boat or fresh off the plane in LA, sort of wanting to become a star. And it's, I think, even though it portrays sex in the porn industry, I think apparently it's not a sexy film. It's a real sort of warts and all sort of expose of what really goes on. I think it's sort of the line between fiction and fact is blurred in this one, but it did get a lot of great reviews for the director and the lead actress's performance. So yeah, no, really interested to see how this one plays out. I expect it will be 18 rated over here. Maybe needs some extra password protection on Mubi to make sure that the young kids don't get to it. But if there are any young kids out there with Mubi accounts, who knows? I don't know. There might be some looking to broaden their mind with European cinema.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that might not be up for watching something quite pornographic on the big screen, we've got a new A24 TV show that we'll have to get round to eventually, and that's kind of starring Amy Adams. So her and A24 have teamed up to develop Anna North's hot new feminist Western novel, Outlawed, for the TV. So the book only was recently published as recently as January 5th, and it kind of debuted at number 6 at the bestseller list for the New York Times. But Outlawed follows a young midwife through her initiation into the notorious Hole in the Wall gang and their dangerous mission to transform the Wild West. So Dallas, you obviously work or involved in a library. Have you heard about this book?
I haven't, but I will be making sure that we do get a copy just so I can read it in advance. Hopefully we see it sooner than Amy Adams' other recent foray into the world of book-to-screen adaptations, The Woman in the Window, which has been in sort of release purgatory for a couple of years. I think it was owned by Fox, and then Fox were absorbed by Disney, and then they didn't know what to do with it. And I think Netflix have now picked it up and maybe dropping it around May, but it seems, about a woman who, the woman in the window, obviously not outlawed, but the woman in the window being about a woman who's scared to leave her own house, who spies on her neighbours and then thinks she's seen something that maybe or not she hasn't. Seemed perfect for sort of pandemic viewing because no one else was allowed to leave the house. So I thought a lot of people might have been able to empathise with her. But she's got good pedigree in terms of TV series. Sort of Sharp Objects was fantastic. So always keen to see Amy Adams on the big or small screens. So yeah, excited for this one. A24. The westerns have been of varying quality. Slow West I was a big fan of. Maybe not so much of Woman Walks Ahead, but yeah, interested to see this one.
Yeah, so now we're going to dive into Minari. So, a point of notice, we recorded our thoughts fresh 2 months ago after watching a screener. So, some of the discussion about the film, sort of surrounding kind of release dates, might be a little bit out of date. Obviously, the film has kind of been screening for about a week now via A24's viewing platform. But if you're lucky, there might still be tickets available at the Glasgow Film Festival's virtual premiere of the film on Wednesday. So check out that film there. And now we'll go back in time and hear me and Giles' thoughts on Minari a couple months ago.
Minari is a semi-autobiographical Korean-American film written and directed by Lee Isaac Chung about a Korean family who moved to Arkansas to start a farm in the 1980s in order to try and achieve their version of the American dream. The film stars Steven Yeun, Yeri Han, Yoo Jung-yoon, Noah Chu, and Alan S. Kim. It won the Grand Jury Prize and Audience Award at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival, pretty much just over a year ago, and we're finally getting to see it. And it is also going to be A24's pretty much only contender for the Academy Awards, which will take place later this year. So it was released in the US this month, and it will open at the Glasgow Film Festival virtually, not only in Glasgow, but around 22 other sites in the UK, and will receive a UK release from Altitude on the 13th of March. So, Lee, first things first, it's been 5 months since our last A24 film. Does it feel good to see that logo pop up on your big/small screen?
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those ones, like, we had such high hopes. Like, obviously we were just kind of recording this, like, to slightly date it just before Christmas, and it was one of those things, like, we thought like this was going to be the year things would slow down a little bit for the podcast, kind of naturally we would kind of come to the end of the line, have sporadic movies. Maybe we drop in a Green Knight episode here, a Zola one there, maybe do the TV shows. I didn't anticipate that sort of halfway through the year be like, that's your lot for the year, and you might have something to look forward to in July 2021, which is crazy. It's been bizarre.
Yes, it has been a very odd year. 2020 being a very odd year for A24, with them releasing more merchandise than films. It's like every time they get sick of people asking, when are you going to drop the Green Knight, they drop a towel or a blanket instead. Of course, we finally do have dates for the next two films from A24. Green Knight will be the end of July, and Zola will be the end of June. No word yet. Actually, well, as I say, we're recording this just before Christmas because we're both lucky enough to have seen the film, and we're recording our thoughts fresh for this. But still no word on Saint Maud in the US. Perhaps they'll wait another year and release it around October time for Halloween, but I guess we'll see. But I mean, how much did you know about this film going in, and I guess were your expectations met upon finally watching it?
Yeah, I remembered sort of a few episodes ago, we kind of talked about the trailer being like, it was a pretty interesting trailer. It wasn't spectacular. Usually we think of like A24 trailers as sometimes being more exciting than the film, or a real piece of interest in marketing. I think I described it as the time of being quite a traditional Oscar friendly trailer, where I'd sort of felt in the past few years, very much since Moonlight, every year, people like ourselves are like, right, what A24 film can be up for Best Picture this year, or what's going to be the, who's going to be maybe a drop in for like Best Actor. I mean, I thought we were relatively sensible, thinking Uncut Gems stood a chance in terms of someone like Adam Sandler, for example. The Farewell, or maybe it'll get all this. And then they've all kind of come up a little bit short. That there's been the chat that A24 sometimes just has, because of just their natural budget, pick one film and that's their go-to, Oscar contender really, and it's kind of come up a bit short. But with sort of Minari, it seems like they've seen a potential opening. We've just talked about it as well, like there was all these other films like Green Knight, Zola, even Saint Maud that were ahead of this film really in terms of release date. So it was quite telling that this one is getting a release date it's starting to kind of roll out in December as we speak in sort of virtual screenings, getting runs, like a 5-day run at the Lincoln Center online, who managed to tell that I had a VPN and wouldn't let me watch the film. And all these sorts of things, like, and then it's kind of getting released in February in America. So it's very interesting that we've got that, and then Green Knight, etc., are later in the year. I think they see a lot of potential confidence in this being able to take advantage of a quieter, slower, less competitive Oscar year, and I think they might stand a good chance.
Do you think that we could be looking at, the quite crazily to speak about it, but the second Korean language film to win back-to-back Best Picture Oscars?
I wouldn't rule it out. And when's the Oscars? 2021, is it like March or something this year? Or is it April?
I think it's going to be April, beginning of April now. So
it stands a good chance. And I say that's coming from someone that was like, I was looking forward to the film, like, no doubt about it, but the marketing before it, sort of the trailer, I only watched it the once. I wanted to keep myself kind of a bit isolated. Left me a little bit flat. I was still really interested, but upon watching the film, I thought this is really, really special. Definitely one of the best films of the year. And I'm really hopeful that maybe in another year I would think it would be in the mix for something, whereas now I view it as something that's potentially a very, very strong contender. This is coming from the guy that said the same thing about Uncut Gems, but it doesn't have a Parasite or anything that it goes up against this year for sure. What did you think?
I mean, I really liked it. I think it was. I actually hadn't really watched the trailer or anything. I thought it was going to go on cold. I mean, I hadn't really raised my expectations too much because, I mean, initially we were looking at a sort of April release. They sort of announced that a few weeks ago, saying April release. So, okay, I might be able to get to see it around about, March or something if, we've got a good relationship here with Altitude reviewed several other films. So I thought we've maybe gotten in to see it then. Then the Glasgow Film Festival announced it was going to be screening sort of nationwide then. So, okay, well, see it 26th of February. If that, and then luckily enough, as we're members of a certain film society in the UK that should remain unnamed because we're not really meant to talk about the fact that we've watched certain films. Technically, we're under embargo, but we were very lucky enough to have seen it in the past week. We decided, let's get our thoughts in fresh rather than coming to it back in February, and we're like, oh yeah, that was that really good film that we watched. What was it about again? So went in kind of cold and blind, but there was something really sort of heartwarming about this film, even though it's, it can be a sort of tough watch. I mean, it's about a Korean family trying to get their own version of the American dream, but I think it's safe to say that several times that dream strays into nightmare territory for them. I mean, it's, like I said at the start, it's semi-autobiographical about Lee Isaac Chung's sort of upbringing, so it's not a surprise to see that even though, I mean, I think there's a conversation at the moment about who is going to be campaigned in the lead actor category. It's a thing which gets, there's so many conversations this year. It's the biggest conversation, I think, for most years, is where certain actors sit and where it's, are they a lead? Are they a supporting? Are they being put in that position because they think they've got a better chance? I know there's a lot of talk at the moment about Chadwick Boseman's chances. He might get nominated for The Five Bloods over Ma Rainey's Back Bottom, even though he's better in Ma Rainey's Back Bottom, but he would be campaigned as a lead there. But he's going to be going up against Anthony Hopkins and The Father, which is basically, it's probably sewn up already. I don't see anyone taking that award from Anthony Hopkins at this point. So therefore it's like, well, we'll push him as a supporting and stuff like this. And, at the moment, I think Steven Yeun from The Walking Dead and The Fantastic Burning a couple of years ago, if you haven't seen that film, do watch it. Fantastic film. He's been put in the lead, but I would actually argue that the focus of the story is almost from the sort of the male child in the family, David's perspective, and I think he could almost be campaigned in the lead. I know it's always struggling when, a child going up against these heavyweights and stuff. But I think he's almost the sort of de facto lead. It's a lot of scenes from his perspective, and I think his performance. I know he charmed the pants off of Sundance when he was there. Look at Alan D. Kim. I think he was like wearing his sort of like cowboy hat and stuff from Arkansas, and people just sort of fell in love with him. Is it the one with the cowboy?
Yeah, that they've gone with that as his IMDb picture, which is a choice.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, what did you make of the sort of performances and the sort of family dynamic? I mean, who did you see as the lead for this film?
Yeah, it's one of those ones, like, the family dynamic was very interesting, and I think it's almost slightly cliche, and I'm sure we'll see plenty of this as we kind of move into the post-COVID world whenever that happens. Is a film like this, I would love to have watched it in 2020 at Sundance with people like Sean, who hosts Missing Frames, just to watch that in a film festival bubble, because I found it impossible not to view sort of the family dynamics within sort of COVID, which was kind of frustrating. I'm like probably many people at the moment. I get shocked when I see people hugging and kissing and shaking hands in films, but for me, I thought the film, my feeling was it was going to be about Jacob, the dad. He was going to be kind of the lead, but I felt very much that we were going through sort of obviously the character of David, and I found David quite relatable in a way that I never kind of expected to. I mean, it was weird to make me think, like, I watched it and I loved the dynamic between him and his grandmother, Sunja. Hopefully I've got that correctly. She was played by Steven Yeun, and it reminded me almost of my relationship of how I viewed my grandmother when I was a kid. She's actually my last surviving grandmother, and it's one of those things that it's hard when you watch a film like this not to miss grandparents and family that you can't really see. And it reminded me sort of, I had two grandmothers that were both very different. I probably had one that was like an incredibly traditional kind of grandmother, someone that is making the soup on a Sunday, home baking, wears the tabard, that sort of thing, what would be the cliche stereotypical grandmother. And then I had another grandmother that was very much more sort of like, she could wear like a shell suit, she was quite active, had different versions of like airs and graces, very kind of similar to Sunja. And I remember just sort of thinking like, oh, she's like not a real kind of grandmother in a way. That's not how a grandmother behaves and all that sort of stuff. And I can remember sort of saying that to my mum once, and I just got absolutely, pulled over the coals for thinking something like that. And it was really interesting to see sort of that this is a very traditional Korean film in a way, in terms of the family dynamics, but with like a lot of these A24 projects, whether it's been something like Rame, for example, or Eighth Grade, where it's different cultures, different backgrounds, different families and units and ways of viewing the world, there's always something in it we think, oh, I can see that, I can relate to that. And I just find that interesting to see that I went through the same thing that kind of young Korean kid went through. I found it interesting, and it kind of held a mirror to kind of how I viewed potentially women and older kind of figures through sort of social norms at such a young age, and how disastrous that can be.
Yeah, well, hopefully you never did any practical jokes as bad as the one
No.
that young David did in this one. It was I'm not going to spoil it because a lot of people wouldn't have seen it, but it immediately reminded me of one particular scene from The Help, a film which has been was nominated for loads of Oscars at the time, but then suddenly everyone's kind of backtracked on and decided actually having a white savior telling the story of all these black maids and stuff is actually not the best thing to be having in this day and age. So yeah, it's kind of been sort of pushed to the side, but there was one scene which it did remind me of. But I think, like you say there, with the it has almost a sort of universality, which A24 is very good at. With, like you say, you've got Rami, The Farewell, and Menashe, about shining a spotlight on different cultures in America, whether it's sort of Asian Americans or sort of Hasidic Jews, or here you've got the Korean family. But even though it is a story specific to them and their struggle, I think anyone who is sort of searching for the American dream can relate to their story about the struggle of moving to a new place, trying to fit in, trying to make something from nothing. You've come across believing all the hype that, you can make it in America no matter what. And the truth is, it's really, really difficult. Even, back then in the 80s. But I think what he does very well is it's not, it doesn't feel like the 80s. There's no on the point, song references or movie references, or even like sort of terrible sort of fashion sense and stuff like that. I mean, there's a few in there, but it's not defined by the decade that it's in, unlike, say, something like Wonder Woman 1984, which does have it sort of rather full on at the beginning. It's got bum bags, parachute pants, and all that, etc. I think it's got a lovely timelessness to it, which I think just helps to widen its appeal to everyone, because there will be a core audience of it will be appealing to Korean Americans, and I'm sure it will play very well there. But I think it certainly has that sort of mass market appeal, in the same way that Parasite broke through. It broke through in America. It broke through in the UK specifically. It was actually the 10th highest grossing film in the UK in 2020. Obviously not that hard a task perhaps, but it's still impressive that a foreign language film was able to do that. And I think if Altitude play their cards right over here in the UK and pitch it to the same sort of audience, I think it could end up doing very well.
Yeah, it's interesting, the A24 films that you kind of picked up on sort of its share and its connections with. I was the same as you with the sort of the farewell, that insight into sort of a culture that is still very, very alien to us. But one that reminded me of almost, and I would love to do it as a double feature, was actually The Death of Dick Long. So another film set in the South. And what I found with that was that it sort of avoided the stereotypes of Southerners in a way. And I felt like it did the same here. Like, it could be so easy to do Minari sort of meets a little bit of things like Green Book, for example, sort of like racial stereotyping. Arkansas is considered probably what, Hicks, rednecks. In this, people seem quite accepting of this kind of very different kind of family. Like, I never realized sort of, well, I only have the film's script in a fiction thing to take from, that they were like, oh yeah, like, there is a decent Korean culture that has moved to a place like this. Like San Francisco, California, East Coast, I get it. But whereas a place like Arkansas, I never sort of considered that. And I found it quite interesting to see them sort of assimilating into that sort of Southern culture, attending the church, and how, by and large, people were very, very accepting of them. I mean, I think the only real moment of sort of racism that I can recall them sort of facing, which I thought might have been a bit more prolific, was like one of the young kids, and it was from sort of the mouth of angels and babes sort of thing, where like a kid was like, oh, I know some Chinese, tell me if I've got this Chinese right, and they just sort of just speak in that kind of slightly stereotypical of, I'm not gonna recount it, but sort of that way, and it's just like, okay, that's kind of kids, but like, I like that it was an accepting place, and it avoided easy to make stereotypes that could have made for some drama, for some tension, and probably would have just been a little bit all too cliche.
I mean, sort of even myself thinking back to the 80s and early 90s and stuff like that, there was certain generations of families and stuff that would refer to certain shops by certain names, and if you were going to have a Chinese restaurant, Chinese takeaway for the evening, it would be called something else, which again is now not PC, and I won't repeat. But I was expecting slightly more resistance to the family and barriers being put up by the community, so that actually did surprise me. I did think I don't know if it's just from sort of watching all these American movies and with certain religious stereotypes of people in the South, that the character of Paul by Will Patton, I thought that storyline was potentially going to go in a darker place. I thought there was going to be a bit more conflict or whatever. So I mean, it was nice that it didn't go down certain routes that you expected it to go to, but still managed to. Actually, it seemed that most of the conflict and clashing actually came from within the family, which was really quite interesting. There's a really sort of complex relationship between, like you say, David's got this issue and with his grandmother that he's never met, and she sort of suddenly sort of comes into their lives there. There's a huge amount of built up past between the husband and wife. They've been living in, so I think it was like Seattle, California, and then just working away. Not having maybe a great life, but a manageable life. They're making money. They're able to survive, and he's just sort of uprooted to them. I mean, it's like as soon as she arrives, she's like, "This is not what you promised me," and stuff like that, and she feels almost sort of betrayed by him. And it's like, again, the sort of the way their relationship's quite interesting, but I mean, can't talk about the sort of final sort of moments and stuff like that, but it's because people won't have seen it, and I don't want to spoil it. But it's interesting again the way that it goes down, and ultimately it comes down to the issue of family and stuff like that. And I think it's a film which a lot of families, I guess like you say, it's almost difficult to review a film now without the spectre of COVID over it. It's kind of changed everything, and I think it's that a lot of families have gone through a lot of tough times this year, and the thing that will get them through it is family. So I think it does ultimately send a very positive message, I think. What do you think?
I agree, and it avoids almost it being romanticized. That again, it's sort of, as you kind of touched on, achieving this American dream. I mean, they've been there, what, I can't remember, was it, they've been in California about 10 years or something like that. I'm not sure how, and I think they'd moved over there after sort of university. So you can imagine they've been in America a decade, give or take. Maybe we'll go 15 years, as we're being generous with timescale, before Minari as a film begins. And in that sort of thing...
What is it? Because they said that the grandmother hadn't met the youngest child, so yeah, they must have been over before he was born. So yeah, it must have been at least sort of like 10 to 15 years, probably.
And what I found interesting was, like, in a way that they do achieve the sort of the American dream by and large, that he owns that gets this huge stretch of land. Yeah, maybe in a place like Arkansas, for example, it might have challenges with drainage of water, etc. But like, he has bought this huge stretch of land that will kind of keep his family sort of homed, and hopefully give them something that they can have potentially for life, and will only grow in value. You could even imagine it might even be a business park or something potentially by the time you get to 2020 or whatever we're in just now. And it's one of those things, like, and even then, like, they own their own business, they're starting to make advances, like, to achieve this sort of American dream within sort of 10 to 15 years of owning this huge scope of land. And that's what a lot of people think about sort of America, that American dream, that sort of melting pot, and they achieve it. Obviously it's going to be potentially at the expense of sort of family harmony and the challenges, but it was really interesting to see them achieve that. And I like how it focused on that achievement, really, and being able to sort of assimilate into the culture, while I suppose in a way Jacob is more successful at getting into sort of American society than sort of being one with his family. I mean, you think of the start of the film, like, they all arrive at this spot in Arkansas, and like, he's getting out of his car, and then the family are all in another car, and you even look at sort of Jacob in a way where I saw him, and he's like, there he is with this, like, the red cap, the cigarette, he looked like a very masculine Marlboro man kind of vibe and so on. I find that really very, very interesting from an outsider point of view.
Yeah, the red cap, I believe, according to IMDb trivia, was a present to him from his mother. I think when he sort of first moved over to America. So I can understand that. Of course, the red baseball cap in America has taken on a slightly different meaning since the 80s. But yeah, it's like I'm not the big Hamilton fan that you are, but I did sort of was reminded of one lyric when I started watching this film, that immigrants, we get the job done. And by and large, he does get the job done. But I think Jacob is one of those people. I'm guilty of it a lot of the time, in that I'm a kind of a glass half full person. I sort of focus on the things that I don't have or I'm not achieving, rather than what I do have. And I think that's probably one of Jacob's sort of biggest flaws is, like you say, he's got this land, he's got a business and stuff, but he's always striving for more. And I think, like you say, at the point where it's potentially sort of pushing his family away, rather than sort of embracing the life that they do have.
I want to say one thing this film does have is an incredible soundtrack from Emile Mosseri, who did Last Black Man in San Francisco, and absolutely another incredible soundtrack from this composer. I was blown away. What did you make of the score?
I did, yeah. There was certain sort of moments and points that you could totally. I mean, Last Batman in San Francisco was one of my favorite scores of 2019. Oh, so long ago. But if you haven't seen that A24, hopefully you have. If you've been following along with the podcast, hopefully you have seen it by now. If not, rent it straight away. One of the best scores, and yeah, he's also one of those set of talents that I think, if his name appears on the film, I think this is going to be something really quite special. And yeah, it sort of avoided all the sort of usual tropes that you would expect of a movie like that set in that place. And one thing that has always confused me about Arkansas is they could pronounce it Arkansas, whereas it has Kansas in the title. Why is it not called Arkansas when Kansas is called Kansas? It's not Kansas. So can you explain that?
No, I didn't have that note
Nope.
to hand. Yeah, perhaps one of our, I think like 90% of our listeners come from America, so if someone can email in the answer to that, like we need your help. We can understand Korean culture, but this is what we really need someone to clear up here.
Why are you talking about the American one when we are apparently occasionally number one in places like Latvia and Armenia?
Yeah, let's hear. And Mexico, we seem to be doing quite well there as well. So yeah, thank you to our worldwide audience that keep this project going and alive.
Absolutely. So, obviously, because it's a brand new release, for a large section of the A24 project, most of the films had already been out for a couple of years, so therefore we could dive quite heavily into spoilers. We obviously don't want to do that here, but so you can enjoy it unspoiled. But do you have any sort of final thoughts about the film and perhaps a pitch as to why people should take the time to either head out to a cinema, if indeed they are open? At the moment, it's potentially still looking slightly unlikely in the UK and certainly in certain parts of America. But who knows? Some things might have changed in a couple of months with the vaccine rollout. But if not, it will be available to view at home as well. So, what's your pitch?
Go support original cinema. Like, it's just one of those ones, like, I think it's impossible not to watch a film like this and feel emotional, to feel happy about sort of the quality of filmmaking. And I just watched this and I thought that was one of the best films of the year. And it doesn't matter if it's 2020 or 2021 when there's going to be all the movies on the planet potentially come out. I think it's an exciting time to get behind films like this and watch it. And I think people will probably more discover this film through, I think, word of mouth, to be honest. I don't think there'll be many chances for people to see this in cinemas. I hope I'm wrong by the time this episode drops. But yeah, this is a really, really special movie, and I can't wait to see it again, and hopefully in a big screen, hopefully with friends and potentially loved ones in 2021. So that's my hope for the future.
Absolutely. And A24, I've seen the Minari Korean sort of vegetable box thing that you've been sending out to certain critics. If you've got a couple of spare, you can always send them our way. But in terms of the sort of future, we know that Lee Isaac Chung is directing a live-action remake of Your Name, one of my favourite animated films of the last decade. I was very reticent towards the idea of a live action remake. I think the animation version is perfect. I'm keen to hear your thoughts now, having seen one of his films. Does it sort of raise your expectations that they might be able to do something different and worthwhile with the live action remake?
I hope so. I think, yeah, we can only try and be positive. I mean, we're getting a real lack of films at the moment, so I'm in the mood for anything that is going to potentially go into the cinemas and get people there. So I'm going to be positive for once. What about you?
I'm more positive now, having seen this. I think he understands character and certainly sort of relationships and stuff like that, and can portray them very well. So I think I think he'll understand the central relationship between the two main characters in Your Name. So I am slightly more positive. I think it's still slightly unnecessary, but I will go into it with an open mind, I think. Yes. And yeah, we'll see whenever that does appear on the big screen. I'm sure we'll mention it in the A24 project in the future.